oh, I expect to have 10 years in power. I'm going to be in power for 10 years. We're dealing with some sort of psychopath, I think. Like, this is not a man who can be, he's not operating by the normal rules of politics. Now, unless Labour give a no confidence vote, which is not typically Labour's style, it's usually Tory style to knife their prime ministers. Labour tend not to. Or King Charles does something practically unprecedented in the modern era and intervenes to recall Parliament, which, let's face it, he's not going to do that. We're stuck with him. Unless the powers that be decide that Starmer is personally putting our relationship with the Americans under so great a threat that Starmer is a liability, in which case I think they'll find a way and he'll be gone. Right? In the same way that Liz Truss gave an interview in the past couple of weeks where she basically said, listen, the Prime Minister does not call the shots. There were things when I was the PM I was made to do that I didn't want to do, and I was told I had to. Boris Johnson has given an interview with the Spectator where he more or less said the same thing. The point is that if these mysterious higher powers that they're alluding to want the PM gone, the PM will be gone. However, for whatever reason, it seems that they're happy with Starmer. And this is, I think, a feeling that a lot of people have. I mean, you guys can tell me if you agree with me or not. It feels like Starmer is in there to do a job, right? To force through some agenda, let's say by the year 2030, right? I've compared him in the past to Darth Vader or to somebody like the Terminator, right? This will be a bit obscure to some people, but do you remember in Pulp Fiction there was that character, the Wolf, Harvey Keitel? You know, we're bringing in the Wolf. You know, it feels like Starmer is this sort of figure, like an agent of the system that's been brought in to do a job. He's honestly quite scary to me. Last thing I'll say, and this is where Blair is super relevant, is that now, after saying they weren't going to do the AI plan and digital ID back in the summer, Starmer is now going full steam ahead with Blair's AI plan. The Tony Blair Institute released an AI document, our plan for artificial intelligence. This document was copied practically word for word, whole sections just copied and pasted. I don't know if the government even bother to try to master these things into an official government plan now for artificial intelligence and how to update all of their systems to utilize AI. Also, his 20-year project of introducing ID cards or digital ID is now being done round the back door. Okay, they're talking about driving licenses going digital. They're talking about shops to start accepting digital ID as age verification. And in fact, just before I came on air, they're talking about if you want to buy a knife in a shop now, you need to show 2 different age proofs. Okay, well, you can imagine, let's make them both digital. So you've got your phone, you've got one app, you've got a second app. Okay, now just think about this. It won't be long before you've got all these different apps on your phone. There's my driving license, there's my age verification, etc. Some bright spark will come along and say, oh, wouldn't it be convenient if we combine all of these into one all-purpose ID? And there's your digital ID. Now, this is where there's a bit of a kind of an interesting thing with the Trump administration, right? Because I don't know if you noticed at the inauguration, but there were a lot of tech oligarchs there. One of them, the founder of Oracle, is a man called Larry Ellison, been around a long time, who Trump is now touting to buy TikTok. Okay, probably for the US security state, if I had to guess. So Larry Ellison controls a lot of infrastructure as the owner of Oracle. Well, Larry Ellison also happens to be the #1 founder and funder, of the Tony Blair Institute. Where does Tony Blair get his money? Larry Ellison. The #2, by the way, is Bill Gates, who also did an interview the other day saying, all that stuff about calling Trump Hitler, forget about all that. I'm cool with him now. I can't wait to work with the Trump administration. And they were all, at the inauguration, they were all sitting in a line, all of these multi-billionaires. And this is the one area where I think that the Starmer administration, or certainly Blair, and the Trump administration will actually see eye to eye. Because if you think about Larry Ellison's agenda and Blair's agenda or what Starmer wants to do, they're basically the same. That they offer these technocratic solutions, essentially. It's the same agenda. The other link between Blair and the Trump administration, again, a little bit hidden, is if you remember the Abraham Accords, was actually, that was a Blair plan. And Blair worked directly with the Trump administration and Jared Kushner on getting the Abraham Accords up and running. Okay, so that's the kind of second in. Now the point here is that if anybody can make peace between the Starmer government and the Trump government coming in, it is literally Tony Blair himself. Mm-hmm. He has got all of these people on speed dial. The question is, would Blair sacrifice his own political capital and his relationships? Is he prepared to sacrifice those for the sake of Starmer, who in his own mind would have betrayed him last summer? Mm-hmm. Right? Is he prepared to do that? And I would suggest that if Blair is not prepared to do that, these are the circumstances that might actually bring Starmer down. Because if the special relationship becomes too frosty, it will actually come to be seen as a national security risk by the British deep state or something like that. That would be my assessment. But I said a lot there, but let me know what you think.
Well, first of all, I thought that was a masterly account. And there's a few things I wanted to say. First of all, about turbocharging court cases and the way that was done in the summer. I was absolutely horrified by it. I have never known anything like that on that kind of scale. I found it a most ominous development when you rush through cases in that kind of way, conveyor belt criminal justice. You can almost guarantee that there's been wrong decisions made, miscarriages, if you like. It was an astonishing thing to do. And the other thing is that we discussed these so-called riots, Alex and I, on the Duran, and I made my view perfectly clear. I didn't think that it was such a big phenomenon anyway. I thought the whole thing was being talked up and made to sound, like there was some, huge event going on, massive things happening a lot, in all the cities. I was phoning around all my friends and acquaintances across England, and they're telling me, there's no one here, nothing. There's a few people in one or two places, but nothing on anything like the scale that the media said. And of course, as you absolutely rightly said, the actual Southport affair was absolutely horrifying, and there is still a huge reluctance to talk about it, just as there is a huge reluctance to talk about the grooming scandal, by the way, which my wife Catherine got fairly close to in a kind of a fashion, because in Oxford she actually was familiar with this hostel where it was all happening, and I remember telling me about it, and it was very disturbing. Anyway, there we go. About Starmer having been brought in to do something, I think what we are seeing with the Starmer government is basically the national security state. I think this is what this is all about. It is about establishing a network of controls over the British population. I think the British political class were deeply horrified by the Brexit referendum vote. They were very, very alarmed by the Jeremy Corbyn movement. I'm not making, people may not like Jeremy Corbyn. They may think that was wrong, but it was not what the British political class, the British elite wanted to see. They didn't want to see Brexit, absolutely. And so he is being brought in basically to create a structure of control that will enable the British state to continue without being as affected by the kind of pressures that we see. So digital IDs, all of those sort of things, conveyor belt justice, and targeting sections of the community which are famously, cantankerously independent and willing to stand up for themselves. And of course, the farmers. That's exactly where the farmers come in, because the inheritance tax raid on the farmers is not going to produce any money on anything like the kind of scale that would make it worthwhile to do as an economic measure. And you could argue that it's going to do much more damage economically than it's going to do, gain the government money. In fact, I would argue that. So, as I say, I think what they're doing is they're hammering away at people who are independent-minded, groups that are independent-minded, and they're creating a structure of control. And again, this is one reason why this anger about Elon Musk, because he's coming along, he's taking a different line. He wants a more open use of the social media. At least that's what he says. And this goes completely against what the Starmer people are, what the Starmer government, what the whole Starmer government is about. Now, whether they will succeed in all of this is another matter. It could very well provoke a backlash eventually. But I do get the sense that people are very demoralized in Britain at the moment. We've had huge amount of movement over the last 10 years. We had, as I said, Brexit. We had the Corbyn movement. They've all been beaten down. So in this mood of demoralization, however unpopular Starmer is, he's able to move forward with this agenda quite effectively. So those are my thoughts. I don't know what you would say about this, but that's my thoughts. I think it's much more, creating a network of controls is much more important than making the economy grow, or any of these things that people are talking about that the Starmer government is supposedly trying to do. I don't think that's the priority agenda at all.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you've said there, and I think when you talk about the national security state, I actually think that we've seen several times where they have blatantly taken over the newspapers. Like, we're meant to have a free press in this country. I remember in about a week after Southport, there were these, talks of, there are going to be demonstrations in this place and that place and the other place. And every single newspaper ran with the front page because there was a counter protest, against racism or something. Unite against racism, it was called. And I remember it was the Sun, it was the Guardian, it was the Telegraph. I mean, when have you ever seen all these newspapers on the same page, all at the same time? It's blatant sometimes when it's like, okay, right, your free press, that's suspended for today. Now you're all on the same page. And I actually think that we're seeing another one with this Amazon business where they're all in unison. They're trying to reframe what Southport was as something to do with the availability of knives on Amazon, as if that's the issue. And I mean, it would be very interesting if Bezos, who is one of the world's richest men, and Elon Musk and it's all of these other people who the Starmer government are picking fights with, actually started combining forces. And I mean, again, you would know more about the legalities than me, Alexander, but I'd be very surprised if Amazon didn't have some legitimate legal complaint against every newspaper in the country, smearing them basically as being in any way culpable for what happened. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the people who are culpable are the police and the other authorities who knew all about this extremely dangerous man, who was an extremely dangerous man with psychological problems, and who did absolutely nothing about him. They weren't concerned about that. If you want to look for blame, that is where you look for him. He could have got his weapons anywhere. I mean, he just happened that he bought them from Amazon. If Amazon didn't exist, he would still have found a way to do it. That's the reality of it. If you know people like this, I mean, by the way, I should just quickly say I've actually had the unattractive task in previous periods of my life of having to interview people of this kind. I have. I used to work in the Royal Courts of Justice. They used to come along. I used to see them in the cells. These people are very, very determined, very ingenious. They will, or if they decide to do something like this, they will find a way. The Amazon thing is absolute nonsense. It is simple and straightforward distraction. But they're not worried about controlling people like him, but they are worried about arresting people that they simply label as far right, a term that's never defined. And if we go back to the so-called riots, I've never seen to this day a number given for the number of people who were supposedly protesting in the aftermath of the Southport affair. I've never seen one. I mean, was it 1,000 people across the country, or 10,000 or 100,000? I've never seen anybody give a number for how many it was. In my opinion, the whole thing was just spun out of nothing. And obviously there were some people who protested in some places, but the crackdown that took place, that is the real story.
Yeah, no, I